Hi friends, welcome to See the Lights art project. This is Poppy Collage and this is lesson 3. Now with all of these See the Light art projects, you need to watch them in sequence, lessons 1, 2, 3, 4, and work along with me or work at your own pace in order to complete a really great project based on a famous artist. And so when we were together, we were talking about Georgia O'Keeffe and how she did a realistic subject matter, in this case flowers, but she brought it to the point of abstraction by magnifying it to larger than life. And so we're doing a poppy collage in order to honor Georgia O'Keeffe. Now for today's lesson, lesson 3, you'll need your poppy on your poster board that you've started so far, glue solution in a bowl with a flat brush, and your assortment of warm colored tissue squares on paper plates. And it can be anything in the warm color family, which means yellow, orange, and red. And you'll want to make sure that you take the time to kind of loosen up all the tissue squares so that they're separated from each other, because tissue squares like to stay stuck together. Okay, so we learned how Georgia O'Keeffe liked to go towards abstraction. She would present the material in a way that you couldn't always tell what it was because she was looking at it in such a new way. Let's take a look at this particular painting. Actually, I'm not going to tell you the title of this painting. I want you to guess. So here it is. Can you tell what it is? It's beautiful and pink and white with a little bit of green and blue and yellow. There's organic shapes, and you really can't tell what it is because it feels abstract. Well, I'll tell you the title now. It's Pink Tulip. And Georgia showed that tulip so close up, and she put in her own variety by adding in some blue and some green, that you really can't tell that it's a pink tulip. But she wanted you to really look at it, spend some time lingering over the shapes and colors. So that was a really abstracted view of a tulip. But you get a really stunning result, and that's what she wanted you to get, a really stunning result with some impact from her work. So we're going to do this close-up poppy. We've already started by laying our first layer of our lightest hue, and we want gradation, which means a gradual change from one color to the other. And so we're going to continue laying in our tissue squares. So you should be ready. You should be working on a surface that can easily be wiped. So plastic tablecloth, or newsprint. That way, if some of this goes off the edges, it's easy to clean. So your glue solution in your bowl, remember, is a combination of white glue and water. It should be about the consistency of milk. And you have your flat brush. And so we're going to tap off the brush so it's not drippy. And now I'm ready to go to the next hue. Now this is still a light hue of yellow, but I want to see how it looks in combination with the very lightest because I'm going for a gradual change. So I'll just add in a few of these. Now you see I have 5 plates with 5 different hues. You might only have 3. That's fine. You go from your light to your next one. And yours could be darker than mine, and that's okay. I'm using my brush to pick up my squares. See, and I just did one row, one layer of that, and now I'm going to move on to this next one, the next petal. Now, Georgia O'Keeffe went back and forth to New York and New Mexico, as I told you last time. But her husband, Alfred, was much older than Georgia was. And so at one point he got ill. She stayed in New York with him for a period of about 4 or so years. And Alfred died, and she stayed in New York in order to sell off his gallery. She donated all that amazing artwork that he had collected to museums. They were so generous. And then she decided to permanently settle in New Mexico. Now Georgia knew a lot of people in the art world because of Alfred, and so she continued to learn from other artists, even though she was an accomplished artist herself. They would sit and talk about art. They would make art together. She would take ideas from other artists back to her studio. I love that idea of learning from people who do the same kinds of things that you do, sharing ideas. So I'm ready to move into my third petal, and I'm going to keep going. You can see I can go rather quickly. If you don't work as quickly as I do, you can always pause and come back. The idea is you want to put down kind of just one layer of tissue. So you've got to be careful. There we go. Slightly overlapping the previous layer. Now this is important, friends, because the translucency of the tissue is what gets the great effect. Now, do you know what translucent means? Let me show you. I think the best way I can show you what translucent means is to raid my kitchen cabinets, because there's some products in the kitchen that you probably have right now that are a perfect example. And it's these three wraps over here. I have plastic wrap, aluminum foil, and wax paper. Now, plastic wrap is transparent, which means you can see right through it like a piece of glass. So it's clear. You can see me perfectly. And if I were to lay this over something, you can see every detail right through it. That's transparent. Now, aluminum foil is opaque, which means it's solid. You can't see through it. If I take out this foil and lay it over something, you cannot see what's underneath. Can't see me. So that's opaque. Solid. But wax paper is translucent, which means light goes through it and there's some level of detail, but it's not as clear as the plastic wrap. So if I were to put this in front of me, you can kind of see me behind it, a little bit of my face, maybe some shadow, but you don't see any detail. Now, the closer I lay something that's translucent, the closer I lay it to something else, then more detail shows through, but it's a little fuzzy. So if I lay this wax paper on top, if I pull it away from it, you see that there's less and less detail, because light can only go so far. Can you see my hand? You can see my hand behind there, but you can't see the wrinkles in my knuckles or any of the details in my palm. So that's translucent. So tissue paper is translucent, and it's especially translucent when it's moistened or wet, which is what we're doing with the glue solution. A lot of people like to play with tissue paper when they're creating a gift basket where they put several layers together, because the colors can kind of show through. And we need that translucence for this project. So once I have the next layer of tissue on my poppy, I'm ready to move into the next hue. So I'm done with this, but I don't want you to get rid of them quite yet, because you never know. So now I'm ready to move into this one. I'm going to make sure they're unstuck together, and I'm going to keep working. Let me work on this center one so you can see. Now, stained glass window artists used both transparent and translucent pieces of glass. Of course, the light had to come through. They couldn't use opaque glass, because the whole reason they would be hired would be to let light come through into a window. But when next time you're in some type of public building or a church where you see a stained glass window, some of the glass is totally transparent. It's colored, but you can see right through it, and some is translucent, where it just lets light through with no detail. So I got more than one tissue there. I want to make sure I only have one. There we go, one tissue. Now you see how the tissue squares are kind of going on haphazardly. That's okay. They don't need to line up. The random pattern of them is kind of what makes your poppy collage unique from anyone else's. The only thing I'm being careful to do is not have white gaps in between. Now, it's not a tragedy if you do. You can always go back with another tissue. But we want to be thinking in terms of slightly overlapping the layer that you just put on. But I'm turning my direction, so some longer ones go one way and then the other. And I'm going to check to make sure all of my corners and my edges are down. Now this shade of gold here that I'm working on, I really like this shade. So I think I'm actually going to put a couple rows of this color because I like this hue. Now you're going to continue filling up your petals. Now you've got to be mindful of how much you have left. I'm looking at how many hues I have left and how much space I have left, so I'm thinking of that. You might get excited and be so good at the technique that you just keep going and going. Now you should be able to share tissue and even your glue bowl if you're working along with someone else, because this tissue can actually go a long way since we're just using a little one layer, single square at a time. Can you see that? Can you see the translucency and how when it's wet you can see where all these squares overlap? That's what we want. Take a look at this painting by Georgia O'Keeffe. This is one of her large flower paintings and it's called White Flower. And it's a huge canvas. This is probably about half the size of a wall. It took her quite a while to finish it. And it's a little more realistic than some of the other large flower paintings that Georgia did. It's not nearly as abstract. You can tell right away that it's a white petunia. And she just did it so large that the abstraction comes from the scale that she chose to do this very large painting. And Georgia O'Keeffe is quoted as saying, "I decided that if I could paint that flower in a huge scale, you could not ignore its beauty." That's really how she felt. That if she just wanted it so in your face you couldn't ignore it. You know, that kind of reminds me of that passage in Romans, right? Where it talks about how can you ignore what God has done? Let me find that for you. It's Romans 1:20. "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, and his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." See, people have evidence all around them that God exists. The power of a thunderstorm, or the intricate geometry of a beehive, or even the miracle of birth. And so, what is someone's excuse for not believing in our divine creator? It's all around. The evidence, the beauty is all around us. And that's kind of how Georgia felt about her art. She wanted it to be something that people couldn't ignore. Like I said, she didn't like the idea that people would walk by nature and not pay attention to it. So she was just in your face about it and did these amazing paintings where she showed you flowers in a way you had not seen before. Now, here's a situation, my friends, where two of my tissue papers stuck together, and when I went to unstick them, they tore. I'm not going to use those. I'll just set those aside. We want you to keep just one whole tissue square. It's okay. But it does remind me that I need to be gentle when I'm brushing with the glue. I can't get too rough. So continue with your squares of your medium tone. So I did my light tones, I'm now in my medium tone, and this is still warm colors. Oops, that's more than one square. I definitely want one square. See, that was more than one, and so I want to make sure I open it so it's just one layer thick. That translucency is what's important. Now, what if you get up to the edges of your petals and it's past your drawing mark? That's fine. That is absolutely fine. The idea is that you like the shape and you like the gradual change in color. So you're going to make the decision as to when you shift, when you change to the next color. You can even change colors. For example, if you don't have all shades of yellow and gold like I do, and you've decided to do in the reds, but you might have decided to start off with yellow and move to red all the way through the warm colors. That's fine as well. So just know how much you want of each and make the gradual shift. Okay, so I think that's probably as far as I want to go with this medium tone. And now I'm ready to move into the darker. Now, what's going to happen, friends, is it's going to be harder to see where one petal goes to the next because we're all getting kind of where they're bunched close together. Let me just make sure these are separated. And we're going to create that definition when we're together for lesson 4. Okay, so now I'm going to this golder tone. Because the glue solution is glue mixed with water, it will dry as quickly as water would dry. So just remember that when you're brushing your area to lay down your squares, you don't want to get too far ahead of yourself. It'll just dry out. Now, because this is glue on this poster, it will become stiff. It might even bubble or wrinkle a little bit because of the water. You're just going to let your collage dry flat. And it will be kind of crunchy, stiff, and that's okay. Oh, I like this color too. This is a nice color. This reminds me of those California poppies that those Spanish explorers saw on the hills, and they were amazed. Now, you might see some dye coming off on the brush and on your glue, and that's all right. What you don't want to do, however, is go back with glue water that's got a lot of, say, red or a dye in it or a brush and go back to your lighter shades. You would have to wash everything first. But since we're moving from light to dark, we're fine. Check to make sure your edges of all 4 corners of your tissue squares are flat. Press down flat. So brush over them all. There we go. I'm having a little trouble picking up just one square. There we go. Great. Now you can see the gradation, the gradual change from the lighter tone to the darker tone. Almost finished. Oh, getting closer. Now it's important, friends, to have patience. You've heard me say that before, haven't you? A lot of times with art, you have a lot of repetition. Like this, we're putting down square after square. First of all, that's where good preparation is important. So having all those squares prepared in advance. But the other thing is to have patience and don't rush. Take the same care that you did at the very beginning, because then the results will pay off. I think when Georgia painted that huge white petunia, and it was a large canvas, probably took her a long time too. And she wanted people to really spend time looking at it, so she took a lot of care. There we go. I need more glue for that. And I see a little white spot I want to cover up, so I want to put a square there. So take a look through your poppy. Make sure there aren't little tiny white spots where you missed. You can always go back, even though it's layering over. The translucency will create a neat effect. You want to lay down and not have any white gaps. Great. And now I'm ready for my last, my darker color here, which is moving into the oranges. Single. There we go. Now I'm very careful now where I place my squares. I angle them so it works with the angles of the petal. And I just have a little bit more overlap, which is perfectly fine. Like so. Now if you have an open view poppy where you have 4 or 6 leaves that all meet at a center, it might take you a little longer to get through all of your colors to do the gradation down to where you're going. Just stop the DVD and continue so that your first layer of squares is on all of your petals before we move on to lesson 4, where we create some petal distinction. I'm looking forward to talking with you some more about Georgia O'Keeffe as we finish up the final phase of our poppy collage. See you next time.